The wind howled across the frozen wasteland of Vidya, with a fury that could strip flesh from bone in minutes. Ephora pulled her threadbare thermal wrap tighter around her shoulders, knowing it would do little against the -60-degree cold that gnawed at her core. Her breath came in short crystalline puffs that froze before they could dissipate, creating tiny ice sculptures that tinkled to the ground with each exhale. She had been walking for 3 days since her exile, her footsteps the only sound besides the relentless shriek of the wind. The endless expanse of white stretched before her, broken only by jagged ice formations that jutted from the ground like the bones of some ancient, frozen giant. Vidya was known throughout the galaxy as a death world, a planet where only the strongest could survive, and her people, the Vidians, had evolved to thrive in this hostile environment. All except her. Ephora's body trembled as another wave of cold penetrated her defenses. While other Vidian children could generate internal heat sufficient to melt snow with their bare hands, she had always struggled. Her body's thermoregulation system was faulty, incomplete, marking her as weak in a society that valued strength above all else. The tribal elders had tolerated her presence for 18 years, hoping she might develop late. But when the time came for the sacred trial of soul awakening, her failure had been absolute and public. The memory still burned in her mind like a brand. Standing in the ceremonial circle before the entire tribe, she had been unable to maintain her core temperature for even 5 minutes. While other young women her age demonstrated their mastery over the cold, generating enough heat to create steam clouds around their bodies, Ephora had simply shivered and collapsed. The shame had been crushing, but the verdict was worse: exile. The weak cannot survive among the strong. Elder Vasa had pronounced, her voice carrying no emotion, only cold fact. You will leave at dawn and not return until you have proven your worth, or until the ice claims you. Now, 3 days into her exile, the ice was indeed claiming her. Her fingers had long since gone numb, and she could feel the insidious creep of hypothermia beginning to cloud her thoughts. She stumbled over a hidden ridge in the snow and fell face first into a drift, the cold shocking her back to alertness. As she struggled to her feet, wiping ice crystals from her eyes, she saw it. A streak of fire across the purple-black sky of Vidya's perpetual twilight. The object blazed through the atmosphere, growing larger and brighter as it descended. It wasn't a meteor, she realized with growing excitement and terror. The trajectory was too controlled, too purposeful. This was a ship, and it was coming down fast. The craft's engines screamed as it tried to arrest its fall, but Ephora could see it was too late. The ship struck the ice perhaps a kilometer away, carving a deep furrow through the frozen ground, before coming to rest in a shower of sparks and debris. For a moment, the only sound was the wind. Then a new glow began to emanate from the crash site, warm and orange, so different from the cold, blue-white of Vidya's reflected starlight. Despite every instinct telling her to stay away from the unknown, Ephora found herself moving toward the light. Perhaps it was desperation, or perhaps it was hope, but something drew her across the treacherous ice toward whatever had fallen from the stars. The wreckage was larger than she had expected. The ship's hull, a sleek design unlike anything in Vidian technology, had been torn open in several places, revealing glimpses of strange machinery within. But what captured her attention completely was the soft, steady glow emanating from one of the larger breaches. Heat, real blessed heat. As she approached, she heard something that made her freeze in place, a voice speaking in a language she didn't recognize, but somehow understood through her universal translator implant. The words were pained urgent, and definitely not Vidian. Emergency systems activated. Hull breach in sectors 3 through 7. Life support critical. Thermal regulation failing. The voice paused, and she heard a human curse that her translator dutifully converted. Come on, you piece of junk, work with me here. A human. An actual human from the legendary homeworld of Earth. Ephora had heard stories, of course. tales of the warm worlders who had spread across the galaxy, adapting to countless environments, but never truly mastering any single one the way her people had mastered the cold. They were supposed to be weak, dependent on their technology for survival. Yet this one had survived a crash that would have killed most Vidians outright. Curiosity, overcoming caution. She crept closer to the breach in the hull. The warmth that flowed from the opening was like nothing she had ever experienced, and she found herself drawn to it, like a moth to flame. Through the gap, she could see the interior of the ship filled with blinking lights and humming machinery, and there, hunched over a console with his back to her, was the human. He was tall and lean, wearing what appeared to be a form-fitting suit, covered in thermal patches. His hair was dark, streaked with premature gray at the temples, and his hands moved with practiced efficiency across the alien controls. She could see blood seeping through a tear in his suit at the shoulder, but he seemed oblivious to the injury. Thermal exchanger online. Emergency heating coils active. Power at 40% and falling. He turned slightly, and she caught a glimpse of his profile. His features were sharper than those of her people, his skin pale even by Vidian standards. But his eyes, when they briefly looked in her direction, were intense and intelligent. Someone's out there. Ephra froze, realizing she had been spotted. For a moment, human and Vidian stared at each other through the gap in the hull, each assessing the other. Then, the human did something unexpected. He smiled. "Well, this is either very good luck or very bad luck," he said, his translator, rendering his words in perfect Vidian. "I'm Dr. James Cash, xenobiologist and apparently crash victim, and you are either my salvation or about to eat me." Despite her dire circumstances, Ephra felt a laugh bubble up from somewhere deep inside. "Vidians don't eat people," she managed, her voice hoarse from the cold. "We're not monsters." "Good to know," Dr. Cash replied, wincing as he moved his injured shoulder. "In that case, would you like to come in out of the cold? I've got heat, minimal life support, and what my ship's computer optimistically calls emergency rations. Fair warning, though, the ship's pretty banged up, and I can't guarantee we won't freeze to death in here. But the odds are better than they are out there." Ephra hesitated. Accepting help from an outsider went against everything she had been taught. Vidians were supposed to be self-sufficient, relying only on their own strength and the strength of their tribe. But the warmth flowing from the ship was so tempting, and the alternative was almost certain death in the storm that was building on the horizon. "I shouldn't," she said quietly. "But you will," Dr. Cash observed, "because you're practical. And being practical means staying alive long enough to worry about cultural taboos later." He was right, and they both knew it. With a deep breath that sent another puff of crystalline vapor into the air, Ephra climbed through the breach into the alien ship. The warmth hit her, like a physical blow so intense, after days in the freezing wind, that she actually staggered. Her body immediately began to respond, blood flow returning to her extremities with painful intensity. She had to brace herself against the bulkhead as sensation returned to her hands and feet in a rush of pins and needles. "Careful," Dr. Cash warned, moving toward her with obvious concern. "Warming up too fast can be dangerous. Let me adjust the thermal output." He manipulated some controls on a nearby panel, and the heat diminished to a more manageable level. "Better," Ephra nodded, still too overwhelmed by the warmth to speak. She looked around the ship's interior with wonder. Everything was so different from Vidian technology, which was built for durability and resistance to extreme cold. This ship seemed designed for comfort and efficiency, with smooth curves and soft lighting that was almost organic in its warmth. "This is incredible," she breathed, running her fingers along a control panel that responded to her touch with gentle chimes. "How does it all work?" "Very carefully, and not very well at the moment," Dr. Cash replied with a rueful smile. "The crash damaged most of our primary systems. We're running on emergency power, which means we have maybe 6 hours of heat and life support before everything shuts down." 6 hours. Afera repeated the reality of their situation, settling over her. That's not very long. No, it's not, he agreed. But it's 6 hours more than either of us would have had out there. He gestured toward the breach in the hull, where the wind could be heard howling with renewed fury. The storm's getting worse. As if to emphasize his point, a particularly violent gust shook the entire ship, sending loose debris skittering across the deck. Ephra instinctively moved closer to the human, seeking the comfort of shared warmth and presence. "What were you doing out there?" Dr. Cash asked, his tone carefully neutral. "This isn't exactly a tourist destination." The question hit Afera like a physical blow, bringing back all the shame and pain of her exile. She turned away, unable to meet his eyes. "I was exiled from my tribe. I'm defective." "Defective how?" "I can't generate heat like other Vidians." She admitted the words, tasting like ash in her mouth. "My thermoregulation system doesn't work properly. In a society where survival depends on mastering the cold, I'm useless." Dr. Cash was quiet for a long moment, and when she finally looked back at him, his expression was thoughtful rather than pitying. "You know," he said slowly, "on my world we have a saying, it's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change. Maybe your tribe has it backwards." "What do you mean?" He gestured around the ship's interior. "All of this technology exists because humans couldn't survive in hostile environments on our own. We had to adapt, innovate, find new ways to thrive. Maybe your defect isn't a weakness. Maybe it's evolution." Ephra stared at him, something stirring in her chest that she hadn't felt in years. Hope. The elders would never see it that way. "Then maybe it's time for new elders," Dr. Cash said simply. "But first we need to survive the next 6 hours." As if summoned by his words, an alarm began to sound throughout the ship. Red lights flashed, and the temperature immediately began to drop as the heating system struggled with some new crisis. "What's happening?" Ephra asked, fear creeping into her voice. Dr. Cash was already at the controls, his hands flying over the displays. "Power coupling failure in the thermal exchanger. We're losing heat fast." He paused, studying the readouts with a frown. "I can fix it, but I'll need to access the external power junction. In this storm outside the ship." "That's suicide," Ephra said flatly. "No one can survive out there for more than a few minutes." "I can," Dr. Cash replied grimly. "My suit has integrated heating elements and emergency oxygen. It'll buy me maybe 10 minutes. And if something goes wrong, if you get lost in the storm or the suit fails," he looked at her directly, his eyes serious, "then you'll have to figure out another way to stay warm." The implications of his words hung in the air between them. If he died trying to repair the system, she would be trapped in a dead ship with no heat, slowly freezing to death, just meters away from salvation. But if he didn't try, they would both die anyway. "There has to be another way," she insisted. "Not with the equipment I have available," he replied, already moving toward a storage locker that contained what looked like additional survival gear. "Unless—" He stopped, turning back to her with a speculative look. "Tell me about Vidian physiology. How exactly does your thermoregulation work?" "We have specialized organs called heat generators," Ephra explained, confused by the change of topic. "They're located here, here, and here." She touched points on her torso and back. "They burn calories at an accelerated rate to produce heat, which is then distributed through our circulatory system." "And yours don't work?" "Mine barely function. The doctors said it was a genetic anomaly, a recessive trait that crops up maybe once in a million births." Dr. Cash nodded slowly, his expression growing more excited. "That's not an anomaly. That's adaptation. Your people evolved to survive in this environment by becoming living furnaces, but that makes them dependent on constant caloric intake. You, on the other hand, have evolved to be more energy efficient." "I don't understand." "Your body isn't defective," he said, moving to another console and pulling up what looked like a complex biological diagram. It's optimized for a different kind of survival. Lower energy consumption, better insulation, probably enhanced resistance to thermal shock. You're not a failed Vidian. You're the prototype for something new. Ephra felt something shift inside her, a fundamental change in how she saw herself. Even if that's true, it doesn't help us right now. Actually, it might. Dr. Cash pulled up another display, this one, showing the ship's schematic. The thermal exchanger isn't just damaged, it's completely offline. But the heat distribution system is still functional. All we need is a heat source. I told you I can't generate enough heat to matter. Not on your own, he agreed. But what if I told you there was a way to amplify your natural abilities, to turn your energy-efficient system into something even more powerful than what other Vidians have? He moved to another storage locker and withdrew a device that looked like a metallic vest covered in thin wires and small nodules. This is a thermal amplification suit designed for human use in extreme cold environments. It works by capturing and redirecting body heat, creating a feedback loop that can increase thermal output by up to 300%. Ephra stared at the device, hardly daring to hope. You think it would work on me? There's only one way to find out, Dr. Cash replied. But if it does, you might be able to generate enough heat to power the ship's systems and keep us both alive. The risk was enormous. If the device didn't work, or if it somehow damaged her already fragile thermoregulation system, they would both die. But if it did work— How do we do it? She asked. The next hour was a crash course in human technology and Vidian physiology. Dr. Cash worked with a speed and precision that spoke of years of field experience, modifying the thermal amplification suit to interface with Ephra's unique biology. She in turn shared everything she knew about her own condition, describing sensations and limitations that she had never discussed with anyone. The key, Dr. Cash explained as he calibrated the suit's sensors, is not to fight your body's natural responses, but to enhance them. The suit will monitor your thermal output and use microelectric stimulation to encourage increased production from your heat generators. Will it hurt? Probably, he admitted honestly, but not as much as freezing to death. When the modifications were complete, Ephra slipped into the suit with Dr. Cash's help. The material was unlike anything she had ever worn, conforming to her body like a second skin, while remaining flexible enough to allow full movement. As soon as the connections were made, she felt a strange tingling sensation throughout her torso. How do you feel? Dr. Cash asked, monitoring her vital signs on a handheld scanner. Strange, Ephra replied. Like there's electricity running through my veins. That's the suit interfacing with your nervous system. It should feel more natural in a few minutes as your body adapts. He moved to the ship's main console and began rerouting power systems. I'm connecting the heat distribution network to your suit's output. When you're ready, try to activate your heat generators like you would normally. Ephra closed her eyes and reached deep inside herself, seeking the spark of warmth that had always been so elusive. For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, she felt the familiar flutter of her heat generators coming online. But this time was different. Instead of the weak, barely perceptible warmth she was used to, she felt power building inside her like a rising tide. The sensation was intoxicating. For the first time in her life, she felt truly warm from the inside out. The suit amplified and redirected her natural heat production, creating a feedback loop that grew stronger with each heartbeat. She opened her eyes and saw Dr. Cash staring at his instruments in amazement. Incredible, he breathed. You're generating more thermal energy than 3 normal Vidians combined. The ship's systems are coming back online. Around them, the ship hummed back to life. Lights brightened, air circulation resumed, and the temperature began to climb steadily. Ephra felt a surge of pride and accomplishment unlike anything she had ever experienced. I'm actually doing it, she whispered. You're not just doing it, Dr. Cash replied with a grin. You're exceeding every parameter I had. At this rate, we'll have full environmental control within the hour. But even as he spoke, Ephra felt something changing. The power flowing through her was growing stronger, almost beyond her control. The suit's feedback loop was accelerating, and she could feel her heart rate increasing as her body struggled to keep up with the demand. "Something's wrong," she gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. "It's too much." Dr. Cash was immediately at her side, his scanner revealing what she already knew. "Your core temperature is climbing too fast. The suit's amplification is exceeding safe parameters. Can you shut it down?" "Not without losing all the progress we've made," he replied grimly. "But I can try to modulate the output, bring it back under control." He worked frantically at the suit's controls, while Ephra fought to maintain her composure. The heat inside her was becoming painful, like a fire burning in her chest. But even as she struggled with the overwhelming sensation, she realized something important. "Wait," she said, grabbing Dr. Cash's arm. "Don't shut it down. I can control this." "Ephra, your temperature is approaching dangerous levels." "Trust me," she insisted. "I've spent my whole life learning to manage my heat production. This is just more. A lot more." She closed her eyes again and focused, not on generating heat, but on controlling it. Instead of letting the power build unchecked, she began to direct it, channeling the energy through the suit's network and into the ship's systems with conscious intent. It was like learning to walk all over again, but gradually she found her balance. When she opened her eyes, the ship was fully powered and warm, and Dr. Cash was looking at her with something approaching awe. "How did you do that?" he asked. "Practice," Ephra replied with a small smile. 18 years of learning to work with what I had, instead of trying to be something I wasn't." For the next several hours, they worked together to stabilize the ship's systems and plan their next move. The storm outside showed no signs of abating, and even with full power, the ship was too damaged to fly. They would need to either repair it or find another way off Vidia. "There's a communications array about 50 kilometers north of here," Ephra said, studying the ship's navigation display. "If we could reach it, we might be able to send a distress signal." 50 kilometers in this terrain and weather," Dr. Cash shook his head. "That's a death march." "Not necessarily," Ephra replied thoughtfully. "Not with the right equipment and preparation." As they planned, she found herself studying the human with growing curiosity. He was unlike anyone she had ever met, combining scientific knowledge with practical survival skills and a willingness to trust in her abilities that no one from her own tribe had ever shown. "Why did you come to Vidia?" she asked during a break in their planning. "Research," Dr. Cash replied. "I'm part of a xenobiology team studying how different species adapt to extreme environments. Vidia was supposed to be a 3-day survey mission." He gestured ruefully at their surroundings. "Obviously, things didn't go according to plan." "What kind of research?" "Genetic adaptation, primarily. How species evolve to survive in hostile conditions, and what that might tell us about the future of human expansion into the galaxy." He paused, looking at her with that same speculative expression she had seen before. "Ironically, I think I've found exactly what I was looking for." "You mean me?" "I mean you," he confirmed. "Your genetic variation represents something remarkable, Ephra. You're not a failed Vidian. You're potentially the next step in your species' evolution. In a galaxy that's becoming increasingly interconnected, the ability to adapt to new environments and technologies is going to be more valuable than raw survival instincts." The idea was staggering, and Ephra found herself struggling to accept it. Everything she had been taught about herself, every moment of shame and inadequacy, was being reframed as something positive, even necessary. "The elders would never see it that way," she said quietly. "Then maybe it's time to show them," Dr. Cash replied. "But first, we need to get off this planet alive." They spent the rest of the night refining their plan and preparing for the journey to the communications array. Dr. Cash modified additional equipment to work with Ephra's enhanced thermal output, creating a portable heat source that could sustain them both during the trek. In return, she shared her knowledge of Vidian survival techniques and the local terrain. As dawn approached, bringing Vidya's brief period of slightly less deadly cold, they prepared to leave the relative safety of the ship. Ephora wore the modified thermal suit under her traditional wraps, while Dr. Cash had equipped himself with the most advanced survival gear his ship could provide. "Ready?" he asked, shouldering a pack filled with emergency supplies. Ephora looked back at the ship that had saved her life and changed her perspective on everything she thought she knew about herself. "Ready," she said. The journey across the ice was unlike anything either of them had experienced. The storm had passed, but the cold was still severe enough to kill an unprotected human in minutes. However, with Ephra's enhanced heat production and Dr. Cash's technology working together, they were able to maintain a steady pace across the frozen wasteland. As they walked, they talked about their respective worlds and cultures, sharing stories and perspectives that highlighted both the differences and similarities between their species. Ephra found herself fascinated by Dr. Cash's descriptions of Earth, a world where warmth was taken for granted and technology was used not for survival, but for comfort and exploration. "It sounds wonderful," she said wistfully. "It has its charms," Dr. Cash agreed. "But it's also easy to become complacent when survival isn't a daily struggle. There's something to be said for the strength and resilience your people have developed." "Strength and resilience that apparently don't include me," Ephra replied with lingering bitterness. "Don't sell yourself short," he said firmly. "You've survived 3 days of exile in conditions that would kill most humans in hours. You've adapted to alien technology, generated enough heat to power an entire spaceship, and now you're trekking across a frozen wasteland to save both our lives. If that's not strength and resilience, I don't know what is." His words warmed her in a way that had nothing to do with the thermal suit, and she felt a flutter of something she couldn't quite identify. Gratitude, certainly, but something deeper as well. This human stranger had shown her more faith and respect in one day than her own people had in 18 years. They reached the communications array just as Vidya's distant sun reached its zenith, providing a few degrees of additional warmth that made their final approach easier. The facility was automated and unmanned, a stark tower of metal and ceramic rising from the ice like a monument to Vidian engineering. "Can you access it?" Dr. Cash asked, studying the alien interface. "I think so," Ephra replied, approaching the control panel with confidence she wouldn't have felt days earlier. "These are standard tribal frequencies." As she worked to establish a connection, Dr. Cash monitored their surroundings and the status of his own equipment. The portable heat source was working perfectly, maintaining a comfortable temperature bubble around them both. But he could see that the power cells were draining faster than anticipated. "How long will this take?" he asked. "Not long," Ephra assured him. "I'm sending a broad-spectrum distress signal that should reach both your people and mine." "Both?" Dr. Cash raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure you want to contact your tribe? They exiled you." Ephra paused in her work, considering his question. "They exiled me because they thought I was weak. Maybe it's time to show them they were wrong." The signal went out across the void, carrying their coordinates and a message that would bring help from 2 different worlds. As they waited for a response, they took shelter in the lee of the communications tower and shared the emergency rations from Dr. Cash's pack. "What happens now?" Ephra asked, watching the alien stars wheel overhead. "Now we wait," Dr. Cash replied, "and we plan for what comes next." "What do you mean?" He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. "My research team will be here within a day or 2. When they arrive, they'll want to study you to understand how your genetic variation works and what it might mean for both our species." "And my people?" "Will probably arrive around the same time," he acknowledged. "And they'll want you to return to the tribe and never speak of any of this again." The conflict was clear, and Ephra felt the weight of an impossible choice settling on her shoulders. Return to a people who had rejected her, but might now accept her enhanced abilities, or venture into the unknown with aliens who saw value in what she was, but whose ultimate intentions remained unclear. There's a third option, Dr. Cash said quietly, as if reading her thoughts, which is come with us, not as a test subject but as a colleague, a cultural liaison between our species. He met her eyes directly. Your unique abilities and perspective could help both our peoples understand each other better. The offer hung in the air between them, loaded with possibilities and dangers in equal measure. Before Afera could respond, a new sound reached their ears, the distinctive whine of approaching Vidian ice skimmers. My people, she breathed, a mixture of anticipation and dread filling her chest. 3 vehicles crested the ridge, their sleek forms cutting through the snow like knives. As they drew closer, Ephra could make out the distinctive markings of her own tribe, and her heart sank as she recognized the lead rider. Kalvek, the tribe's most accomplished warrior, and her former betrothed, brought his skimmer to a halt just meters away. He dismounted with fluid grace, his powerful form radiating the kind of effortless heat control that Afera had always envied. Behind him came 2 other warriors, their expressions grim and disapproving. Ephra Kalvik, said his voice carrying the authority of one who had never known failure. You live. I live, she confirmed, rising to face him with dignity she hadn't possessed 3 days ago. Kalvik's gaze shifted to Dr. Cash, and his expression hardened. And you consort with aliens. I survived with the help of a fellow being in distress, Ephra corrected firmly. As honor demands. Honor. Kalvik laughed, the sound bitter in the cold air. You speak of honor while wearing alien devices and consorting with warmworlders who have never known true hardship. Dr. Cash stepped forward, his posture non-threatening but alert. I'm Dr. James Cash, a xenobiologist with the Earth Confederation. I mean no harm to your people or your customs. You mean no harm, Kalvik repeated mockingly. Yet you corrupt our outcasts with false promises and alien technology. The only thing I've done, Dr. Cash replied calmly, is recognize potential that your people chose to overlook. The words struck Kalvik like a physical blow, and Afera saw his heat signature flare with anger through her enhanced senses. You dare suggest we know nothing of our own people? I suggest that evolution doesn't always move in expected directions, Dr. Cash replied evenly. Sometimes what appears to be weakness is actually adaptation to changing circumstances. Enough! Kalvik snarled his hand, moving to the traditional challenge knife at his belt. You will return to your ship and leave this world, and Afera will come with us to face judgment for her crimes. What crimes? Afera demanded, stepping between the 2 males. Surviving, adapting, learning. Betraying your people by sharing tribal secrets with aliens? Kalvik replied coldly. Contaminating yourself with foreign technology. Abandoning the ways of your ancestors for the false promises of weaklings. The only betrayal here, Ephra said, her voice growing stronger with each word, is a society that casts out its own children for being different. Kalvik's eyes narrowed. You have been gone 4 days and already you speak like one of them. The corruption runs deep. The only corruption, Dr. Cash interjected, is the narrow-mindedness that prevents progress. That was the breaking point. Kalvik's hand flashed to his knife, the blade singing as it cleared its sheath. But Dr. Cash was ready, his own survival knife appearing in his grip with practiced ease. Stop! Afera shouted, placing herself firmly between them. This solves nothing. It solves everything, Kalvik replied, his blade steady. Trial by combat. The alien against me. Winner determines your fate. That's not how this works, Afera protested. It is exactly how this works, Kalvik said firmly. Unless the warmworlder is too weak to accept challenge. Dr. Cash looked at Afera, seeing the anguish in her eyes. He could see the trap being set, the cultural pressure being applied, that would force her to choose between her people and her newfound sense of self-worth. I accept, he said quietly. No, Ephra whispered. James, you don't understand. Kalvik has never lost a challenge. He's the strongest warrior our tribe has ever produced. Then I guess I'll have to be smarter than I am strong, Dr. Cash replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The challenge circle was drawn in the snow, according to ancient tradition, a perfect ring, 10 meters in diameter. Kalvik stripped to the waist despite the killing cold, his body radiating heat like a furnace, as he demonstrated the thermal control that made him legendary among his people. Dr. Cash, by contrast, kept his thermal suit sealed, knowing that without it, he would be dead in minutes. "The first to leave the circle or yield loses," Kalvik announced. "The winner claims the right to determine the fate of the exile." "And if I win?" Dr. Cash asked. "You won't," Kalvik replied, with supreme confidence. The two warriors began to circle each other, looking for openings. Kalvik moved with the fluid grace of a predator, his superior strength and heat generation giving him every advantage in the hostile environment. Dr. Cash, meanwhile, relied on his technological aids and scientific training, looking for weaknesses in his opponent's approach. The first exchange came suddenly. Kalvik lunged forward with his blade moving faster than seemed possible in the deep snow. Dr. Cash barely managed to deflect the strike, the impact sending shockwaves through his arms. He gave ground, circling the edge of the combat area, while Kalvik pressed his advantage. For several minutes, the fight was a deadly dance of attack and evasion. Kalvik's superior physical conditioning allowed him to maintain a relentless pace, while Dr. Cash's technical knowledge helped him avoid fatal mistakes. But it was clear that the human was losing ground both literally and figuratively. Then, Dr. Cash noticed something that made him smile. Kalvik's impressive heat generation was melting the snow beneath his feet, creating a thin layer of ice that reformed with each step. The Vidian warrior was so focused on his attack that he hadn't noticed he was gradually undermining his own footing. Instead of continuing to retreat, Dr. Cash suddenly changed tactics. He dropped to one knee and drove the pommel of his knife into the ice, directly in front of Kalvik's advancing foot. The impact was perfectly timed and placed, creating a stress fracture that spread rapidly through the already weakened surface. Kalvik's next step sent him plunging through the ice into the hidden crevice beneath. He roared in surprise and anger, his thermal output spiking as he tried to melt his way free. But Dr. Cash was already in motion, using his lighter weight and better understanding of ice dynamics to position himself at the edge of the pit. "Yield!" Dr. Cash set his blade at Kalvik's throat. For a moment, the Vidian warrior's pride warred with practical reality. He was trapped, unable to gain leverage in the narrow confines of the crevice, while his opponent held every advantage. Finally, with visible effort, he spoke the words that ended the challenge. "I yield." Dr. Cash stepped back and offered his hand to help Kalvik from the pit. After a moment's hesitation, the warrior accepted the assistance, his expression unreadable. "You fought with honor," Kalvik said grudgingly as he climbed free. "And you won with intelligence rather than strength. Perhaps there is wisdom in the alien ways after all." "There's wisdom in many ways," Dr. Cash replied diplomatically. "The key is knowing when to apply which approach." Kalvik turned to Afera, his expression complex. "The challenge is settled. Your fate is his to decide." All eyes turned to Dr. Cash, who looked uncomfortable with the weight of responsibility suddenly placed on his shoulders. "The only person who should decide Afera's fate is Afera herself." "What do you choose?" Kalvik asked, directing the question to Afera for the first time. Afera looked around the circle of faces, human and Vidian alike, each representing a different path forward. She thought about the girl who had been exiled 4 days ago, broken and convinced of her own worthlessness. That girl was gone, replaced by someone who understood her own value and potential. "I choose to be a bridge," she said finally. "Between our peoples, between the old ways and the new. I choose to use my abilities to help both humans and Vidians understand that strength comes in many forms." Kalvik nodded slowly. "The tribe will need time to accept such changes." "Then give them time," Dr. Cash said. "But don't waste the opportunity to learn and grow." As if summoned by his words, new shapes appeared on the horizon. Human atmospheric shuttles, sleek and fast, racing through Vidia's thin air toward their location. Dr. Cash's rescue team had arrived. The next few hours were a whirlwind of introductions, explanations, and negotiations. The human scientists were fascinated by Afera's unique physiology and the potential for cooperation between their species. The Vidian warriors were suspicious, but impressed by the obvious respect with which the humans treated their former outcast. Through it all, Dr. Cash served as translator and mediator, helping both sides understand that they had more to gain from cooperation than from conflict. When the formal discussions were concluded, he found himself alone with Afera beneath the aurora-painted sky of her homeworld. "So what happens now?" she asked, echoing her earlier question. "Now you get to choose your own path," Dr. Cash replied. "My team has formally invited you to join our research expedition as a cultural liaison and xenobiology specialist. Your tribe has agreed to welcome you back as a full member with all the rights and privileges that entails." "And you, what do you choose?" Dr. Cash was quiet for a long moment, watching the play of colored light across the frozen landscape. "I choose to follow wherever this research leads, whether that's back to Earth or out to the stars. And I hope you'll choose to come with me." Afera felt that flutter in her chest again, stronger now, and impossible to ignore. In the space of a few days, this human had shown her possibilities she had never imagined, and helped her discover strengths she never knew she possessed. More than that, he had seen her not as a failed Vidian, but as someone with her own unique value. "The stars are very far from home," she said softly. "But imagine what we might discover out there," Dr. Cash replied. "New worlds, new peoples, new ways of understanding the universe and our place in it." She thought about her tribe, traditional and unchanging, bound by customs that had served them well, but might not be sufficient for the challenges ahead. Then, she thought about the vast galaxy beyond Vidia's frozen skies, full of wonders and possibilities that no Vidian had ever experienced. "I choose the stars," she said finally, "and I choose to discover them with you." Dr. Cash smiled, the expression transforming his face. "Then we'd better get started. The universe is a big place, and we have a lot of exploring to do." As the human shuttles prepared for departure, Afera took one last look at her frozen homeworld. She was leaving as someone completely different from the girl who had been exiled just days before. No longer the failed Vidian who couldn't generate heat, but the successful pioneer who had learned to create warmth in more ways than one. The thermal suit that had saved her life hummed quietly against her skin, a reminder of the technology that had amplified her natural abilities. But more important than any device was the knowledge that she was not alone in the universe, that there were beings who could see past surface differences to the potential beneath. Standing beside Dr. Cash as they boarded the shuttle, watching Vidia shrink away beneath them, Afera realized that she had found something more valuable than the acceptance of her tribe. She had found someone who believed in her, and more importantly, she had learned to believe in herself. She thought the cold would kill her, until a human lit the fire that had always been burning inside. Now that fire would carry her to the stars, warming not just herself, but everyone she encountered along the way. The girl, who had once been considered defective, had become the bridge between worlds. The proof that sometimes evolution's greatest gifts come disguised as apparent weaknesses. As the shuttle broke free of Vidia's atmosphere and accelerated toward the waiting research vessel, Afera reached out and took Dr. Cash's hand. His skin was warm against hers, and she realized that some kinds of heat had nothing to do with thermal regulation and everything to do with connection, understanding, and hope. The stars beckoned infinite and welcoming, and she was ready to meet them.